Okay, so we will start with afternoon sessions, and my pleasure is to welcome Stephen Pemberton, and he will have tutorial on Ixml. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, so if you were here for my talk yesterday, you'll know roughly the background to Invisible XML. It's a method, you could at least see it as a method for treating non-XML documents so that they fit into the XML pipeline. It's a hands-on tutorial, which means you're expected to write some Ixml documents now. So please go to that URL. For those of you online, it says www.cwi.nl/Stephen/Ixml/tutorial. And that you can follow along on that. There's more detail to the slides that I'm giving. The tutorial is designed so that I talk for about 5 minutes, and then you write for about 5 minutes. You produce some examples and try them out, and then I talk again for another 5 minutes. The tutorial is actually designed as a 3-hour tutorial, and we've got 1.5 hours, so a bit of mental mathematics now, arithmetic that tells me that we'll be able to do about half of it. But that's not a problem, because the tutorial is actually also designed to be able to use it for self-teaching. So we're going to do the stuff today as far as we can, and then you can do the rest at home. Or if you want, there's also a video. This is the second time I've given this tutorial. I gave it last November in Amsterdam, and if you missed the story, I got attacked by a group of people with sharp knives who drugged me and then cut my throat, but luckily they were surgeons and nurses, so they had my best interests at heart. But what it meant was that I had to give the tutorial actually from my hospital bed. So you don't actually see me in view, you just see the slides, and I'm speaking from my hospital bed and giving the tutorial. These slides are also online. You can find them on my homepage, which you can find by Googling my name. And all the examples you get, you'll find them at the end of the tutorial. So there's a drop-down that gives you all the chapters, and one of the last chapters is answers to exercises. So I'll start talking. Then when you come to the first exercise, then I'll tell you how to access the software, which is just a web service, so you can just do it from a browser. So how does Ixml work? You have one or more documents, essentially in a non-XML format. You supply an Ixml description of the format that it's in, and that can include details about how it should be, the details of how it should be converted to XML, as you will have seen yesterday. And then the Ixml processor uses the description to read and convert that document to XML. So we'll dive straight in. And I'll be using lots of examples with dates, because the nice thing about dates is they've got structure, but there are lots of different versions of dates, lots of different formats, so we can handle them as comparisons. So, a date. What does a date consist of? Well, here we have the first Ixml rule. A date, followed by a colon. A date is a day, a month, and a year. So there's a commas between the three things, and it's terminated with a full stop. Then we define the subparts. A day is either a digit or a digit followed by a digit. So the semicolon means or, and so it's got two options. It's either a single digit or 2 digits. A digit is just a list of those. So they're strings separated by semicolons, and you can use single or double quotes around your literal strings. So it means those are literal elements that have to be in the input. Similarly, a month can be any one of those 12 values. And finally, a year is 4 digits. Now, there's one thing I left out, because I said a date is a day followed by a month followed by a year, but what there is actually also is a space between those things. So we have to change that to a date is a day followed by a space, followed by a month, followed by a space, followed by the year. So if I run this through Ixml, this is what comes out. Basically, everything that's been identified is surrounded by the element tags that say how that thing was identified. So this is where you get to do your first example. So you have to go to about the third chapter. There are a couple of introductory chapters, but the third one that's called, I think, How It Works. Down at the bottom you'll find the exercise, and in that exercise contains a link that if you click it, it will create another tab where you can upload an IXML file and an input file. And so you can copy your bits of your IXML file from the presentation there, so you don't have to do much typing. And then you have to submit that file plus the input. Any old date will do, but it's up to you. And run it, and you should get back a screen that says, this was the grammar, this was the input, and this is the result. So I leave it now up to you. And in the meantime, I shall watch as people submit stuff.
Would you be so kind just to show the URL again?
It was www.cwi.nl/Stephen/IXML/tutorial. So this is my server waiting to receive files, and as they come in, you'll see them be processed. Somebody's already submitted something. Well done, whoever that was. Oh, bless you. Number 2. Number 3. Yes. It does complain about the line ending.
Save your files with Unix line ending.
Okay, well, in fact, the file shouldn't have a line ending at all because we haven't added that to the description. So, in fact, save the file without any line ending. Sorry?
The IXML file should have
Oh, the IXML should have, yeah, sure.
Unix line ending.
Oh, does it not work with regular ones? It ought to. I'm surprised. Okay, thanks. We're nearly there, I think. Any questions, any problems? Don't know if there's anybody watching online and how they're meant to send any questions. But people online, if you're watching, if you need to ask any questions, if you send it tagged with XMLPrague, then it will come up on the screen here, and I'll be able to see it. Thank you, Thomas, for posting the URL on Twitter. Does anybody want a bit more time, or shall I move on? Move on? All right. The next bit's very short, and we'll take you back to this this example anyway. Okay. So. You should have got an output that looked like that. Now the thing is, we're not interested in those digits at all. We're only interested in the day, month, and year. But we fix that then by adding a minus before the rule for digit. And that just says we're not interested in seeing that in that element in the serialization, so please leave it out. So if you make that change, the output should now look like that. So that's your next task, is to change the rule for digit so that it's got a minus in front of it. Yes, that happens faster. Anybody want any more time? Then we'll move on. So that's the basic method then of producing an XML that encloses the elements you want. As you will have seen yesterday, it's also possible to put data into attributes. So if you, for instance, put an @ sign before the year, then the year will turn up as an attribute of the element and not as an element. What happens with attributes is that even if you haven't got a minus before the digit doesn't show up, of course. The word digit doesn't show up. You only get the element content of whatever year expands to. So basically, all the elements are taken away. You only get the content put into the attribute. So anyway, that's your next task, is to make them all attributes. So the year, the day, and the month, all of them attributes. Yeah, a question? What's up?
I can show you what the output is of your. It comes like this.
So what have you done wrong with the day, month, year? Rule name expected. Date is day, comma, month, comma, year. And then a day. And is this the first thing you sent, or the first earlier one work?
No, that was the first one I sent.
This was the first one you sent.
Yeah.
Is this Windows machine?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you try it with Unix line endings to see if that fixes it?
So, yeah. Suspected this.
In which case, that's my mistake, but for which I apologize. But I thought that had been fixed, and I'm surprised that.
Das wollen wir jetzt hier.
Encoding.
Da ist kein Unix drin.
Ich glaube, das
Encoding kriege ich das nicht.
ist Speichern runter. Machen wir File, Save As.
Oh Gott.
Speichern runter. Und dann kann man das hier durch. Ne?
Unix script file.
Ja,
This is the Unix script file. What shall I save it?
Unix line ending. So that's just with a line feed rather than a carriage return line feed.
question is if we can change this.
Ich glaube, das kriegst du nicht hin über das Speichern unter.
I choose the lines and
It fixed it.
just a little. The result is there is unused rule.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, that's something different. So let me see. Month, year. Oh yes, you've got date rather than day. Oh, you've got date. Oh, but date has to be first.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point.
But this should work. Okay, that's right.
So it's something that I didn't say, but the top level element, so in this case date, has to be the first rule. The first rule is the one that says what the format of the document is, and then all the others, it doesn't matter what order they're in, but the first one must be the top level one.
Is there a reason for that white space?
Oh, well, I'm just about to handle that. But there is, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. Yeah, can I move on? It looks like lots and lots of submissions happening. So, if that last one worked, you should have got something that looks like this, where you've got the day, month, and the year as attributes, and you haven't got an empty element. And the reason that you haven't got an empty element is because all the input characters end up in the output unless you specify otherwise. So every single character that was in the input is also going to turn up in the output, plus the necessary elements. So if you don't want those spaces, I mean the spaces are there because we've got a space between the day and the month and the year, and they've also ended up in the input. So if you don't want those spaces, then you put a minus before the strings for the spaces in the definition of date, and then you will get an empty element. So that's your next task, to change it so that you delete from the output the spaces at the top level. Ooh. Ready to move on, or would you like some more time? I shall move on. So, you should have got an empty element in that case. Now, so I now want to show you how to do options. So we've defined a day as either a digit or a digit followed by a digit. But there's another easier way of writing that, to say that a day is a digit followed by an optional digit, where you put a question mark after something. So that's your next task, to do that. And try both, whether you make the first a digit an option or the second one, see if it makes any difference. And experiment, for instance, make the year optional as well. See a bug in my system that somebody submitted an empty file and that my program didn't properly deal with it, so I shall write that down as a reminder to myself to fix. Submission's still coming in thick and fast. Yeah, question?
The keys that you're allowed to use, the name of the keys, are they intentionally restricted to ASCII characters?
I beg your pardon,
ASCII characters?
what?
The key, the names of the keys, like day, digit, etc.
It's more or less the same as the definition of an XML name.
Okay,
It's
so
not
actually
quite.
Umlauts, for example, should
Yeah,
work.
umlaut should work. Does it not working?
No, I have some error message here. But maybe I have some other syntax problem.
Have date with an.
And is that
German
a single
add.
character, or is it a combination of two
It's
characters?
a single character.
Okay.
Simply. It doesn't work.
Okay, you're probably right that this version doesn't. Yeah, so it's meant. So this is a bug in my system. So so the other implementations will do that properly. It's not intentionally. No, it should be open. That's right. Yeah. It's any XML name more or less.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I just tried to provoke error result.
Oh, yeah?
And this is why I wrote November with 2 M's.
Yeah.
November.
Yeah.
But now he tells me I see an N. I think that's meant the N from November.
Yeah.
But he said permitted is just September. This is
Oh well, that's also an error. That should give the whole list of all, the whole
okay.
list. Okay, I'm sorry. I
no,
changed
it's
it.
just want to
All right.
to
yeah,
understand how it works.
Yeah.
Okay. Because then it would be
Yeah,
logical, of course.
so it doesn't match November.
Yeah,
And so
of
then
course.
it says, well, I see an N, but I
Yeah,
can't.
but why September? This I just
Yeah, well,
couldn't-
yeah. So that's it should give the whole list
Just
there.
because, yeah, okay, yeah.
yeah. Okay, that's another bug of mine that I shall correct. Okay, I'm going to move on, if that's all right with you. So, so if you did try to make the year optional by putting a question mark after it, then the year will indeed be optional, but not the space before it. So that you would have to have the space there even if the year wasn't there. Well, we can fix that by, let's say, making an optional year with a question mark after it, where the optional year consists of the space and the year. But better is to use grouping, where we group the bit that we want to make optional and put the question mark after it. So that if you run that then through the system, then you will get the day and the month, but no year mentioned because there's no year in the input. So your next exercise is to change the definition of year so that it can either be 2 digits or 4 digits, and to do that using grouping and a question mark. Okay. Okay if I move on, or would anybody like a little more time? Okay, so you can specify repetition of characters using, or repetition of anything actually, using a plus. So for instance, in the case of strings here, if I say day and then a space plus, it means any number of spaces, and similarly any number of spaces between the month and the year. You can add a star after anything, and it means 0 or more. So for instance, in this case here, date, we've got 0 or more spaces before the day, and then 1 or more between day and month, and 1 or more between the year. Another way of doing the same thing would be to define a rule called S, which represents spacing, and then make it optional before the day and then required between the day and the month and the year. Anyway, you can also use plus so that you can then allow several dates on the input by putting a plus after date. So that's your next exercise, to do all that, to make spaces optional before the date, more than one between date and month and year, and to allow several dates after one another on the input, on a single line. Okay. Okay, if I move on, I see still actually lots of submissions, so maybe I should just wait a minute or two more. Yeah, and I'm going to show you in the next slide how to fix that. But yeah, they all have to be on the same line. So let me go there straight away. So the problem is you can't put them on separate lines because there's a new line character in there, so we need to specify how you specify new lines. Well, for that we need encoded characters that aren't necessarily visible. I mean, you can include any Unicode character in a string except for new lines because a string has to remain on one line. But some characters are not particularly visible. You can't see there's a difference. So, for instance, a tab is #9, or a non-breaking space is #A0. So those are just the hexadecimal numbers of the character in the Unicode sequence, its position in the Unicode sequence. So these match just a single character in the input. You can include them in character sets like this, which I will treat shortly, which allows you to include several different characters. You don't include them inside strings, they're just freestanding things. So to add new lines, you need to say #A for Unix new lines, and #DA, carriage return line feed, or is it? Yeah, DA for Windows input. So your next exercise is to add new lines to your definition of multiple dates, so that you allow new lines in the input, and then to put the dates on different lines. Any questions? Okay, good. Going to move on. So in the earlier example, we had digit is and then the list of the 10 possible values, but you're allowed to do it's possible to do a shorthand by just in square brackets saying 0 to 9, and then that's just any one of those characters. So a character set like that with square brackets it matches any one character that's included in the set. And there are other ways of specifying a set. You can have several possibilities, for instance, lowercase a to lowercase z, or uppercase a to uppercase z. Oh, there's a missing quote there. Or you could just have a single string of the characters, or you can combine them in any ways. So these all match a single character taken from the set. In the software you're using, you can only use ASCII characters in the ranges at the moment, although any of the other strings you can include any Unicode character you like, but the ranges don't yet work for random Unicode characters, just as a warning. Similarly, you can do the opposite of what's in a set. So you use a tilde before one of those character sets to mean any character that's not included, so the complement of that character set. So for instance, if you wanted to define a string, you could say a string is a double quote, and then any 0 or more characters that are not a double quote, and then followed by a double quote. A quote, any number of characters that aren't a quote, followed by a quote. Now, an empty set doesn't match anything, so that means that tilde an empty set matches any single character at all, a bit like dot in a regular expression. So your next exercise is now not with dates, is to create an Ixml that recognizes a list of strings with spaces between them, and I think it gives you an example of the input and the output on the tutorial page. Any questions? Okay. All right, shall we move on? Is that all right? Anybody want more time? Yell if you do. Okay, so we've seen repetition for spaces and for dates, for instance, using star and plus. But you can also specify another sort of repetition which says it's repeated with something between it. So for instance, in this case here, we've got numbers separated by commas, and so we do a double plus and then a comma as a string, and then that would just recognize whatever a number is, each one separated from the next by a comma. If you wanted to separate by commas and spaces, then you would do the plus plus, bracketed, comma, and then any number of spaces, 0 or more spaces. And this works with star star as well for 0 or more. So anything can follow the plus plus or the star star. And by the way, if you looked at earlier versions of Ixml, you only had a single plus there, but now it's become a double plus for reasons that I don't want to go in now. But you can have anything after a plus plus or a star star, a rule name, a group, a literal, a character set, anything. So I now want you to modify your previous example where you had a list of strings to make it a list of strings separated by commas and spaces if you want. actually doing quite well for time because this is the last slide that I imagined we would handle today. So, so we're doing quite well. Apart from using the question mark for identifying something that can be optional, there's another way of being able to do it. For instance, if we'd specified a year as being the 4 digits or nothing, or if you want to make it more obvious, 4 digits and empty, where empty is nothing, then if you apply it to a date without a year, we get an empty year element instead of no year element at all. So when we did just use a question mark against it, we didn't get any element for year. But now this way, it matches to year except that it's empty. So, so there are 2 ways of doing alternates, if you like. Now the idea was for you to actually do something off your own bat and use Ixml to define an email address. I'll let you decide what you accept as an email address and how you want to structure it. But to write a small, it's fairly simple Ixml that reads a line that contains an email address and returns the XML of that. Any questions? Okay. How are we doing? Anybody want more time, or shall I move on? Submissions still happening fairly regularly. Well, I will talk a bit more because the next bit is an interesting discussion. So, the purpose of Ixml is to convert non-XML formats into XML. It's not necessarily about checking that the input is correct. All we want is the structure. So, for instance, in the dates that we specified, it also accepts dates like 0 January 2021 or 99th of December 9876. And frankly, we may not care because we know that the data is correct. We're not interested in checking it. We just want to get it into a structured format. On the other hand, you might want to, for different reasons, you might want to do some checking. And you'll see some examples of where it is important. So if we want to use Ixml to check the data, then we can tighten up the definition, in particular of day, by excluding 0 as a single digit and only allowing two-digit numbers up to 31. So how do we do that? Well, we say a day is an optional 0 followed by a digit from 1 to 9, or it's 1 or 2 followed by a digit, or it's 30, or it's 31. So that says that basically it can be anything up to 31 with a leading 0 for single digits if you want, and up to 31. So your next exercise is to take your date example again and rewrite it so that it's only restricted to dates between 1 and 31 for the day. Any questions? Got a quarter of an hour left. Okay, I think this will be the last slide. So I'll do this slide, one more exercise, and then the last 5 minutes I'll sort of wrap up and answer any questions you might have. So up to now, our iXMLs have only been accepting a single format and converting that. But now we're going to add another date format so that it recognizes either of them. So apart from the dates that we've been accepting up to now, day, month, year, we're going to add ISO dates, where an ISO date is a year, a hyphen, which gets deleted, a numeric month, a hyphen, and a day, where a numeric month is just 2 digits. So, so for ISO dates, then, we would get something looking like this. So this exercise now is to add ISO dates. So you should use the form that accepts several dates over several lines, and each line can either be a simple textual date or an ISO date, and it will recognize each of those. So that's your next exercise. And then in 5 minutes' time, I'll just stop to wrap up and answer questions. All right, so that's 5.2. So we didn't get through all of the tutorial. We got through about 2/3 of it, which is good. But the rest you can do from home by yourselves. So, are there any questions or comments before we wrap up? Yes. Do you want? I'll give you the microphone in case.
You're saying that I like the innovation in the grammar by using the plus and then the separator. That avoids some clumsy constructs that you usually would have to do. So that's nice. Thumbs up.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Yeah. In fact, that comes from an earlier research project I did where we discovered that made life so much easier because there are so many structures that look like that it's good to have a syntactic variant that recognizes it. Any other questions? Any other comments? So as you probably heard, oh yeah, you'll have some more here.
Well, another design thing. At some moment we had a grammar rule that started with an optional space.
Yes.
And that's something that I tend to avoid in grammar rules because it makes it more difficult to reuse your symbols because you always have to realize there may be a space that can be ambiguous. So I always use the spaces in between symbols and not at the end or start of rules.
Right, right. Well, that's indeed a choice where you want to put your spaces. What I'm thinking about doing for Declarative Amsterdam is doing an advanced IXML tutorial where we discuss exactly that sort of issue. Yeah. So you probably heard that IXML officially got released yesterday. Yesterday, yeah. So at invisibleXML.org you can find not only the specification, you can find example grammars, you can find at least 2 other implementations which are actually probably better than this one because they do properly accept Unicode in ranges and stuff like that. Example grammars and tutorial and introductory material. So if there are no other questions, no other comments, then I thank you all for being here and see you next year.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And probably there is the last chance to get the coffee. So there is now coffee break, and we will meet in 30 minutes. And there will be a session by Mike Kay, when you will be able to ask probably any question about Saxon and Saxonica products. Okay, so see you after the coffee break.